Recanvass, very simply, and I'm going to stress this loudly and clearly, is not a recount. It is not a recount. There have been reports out there that it's a recount. It's not a recount. What it is a verification process to validate the vote count from election night. And that's what we're doing now. What we're doing here today is exactly what we would be doing even in the face of a landslide, because what we want to make sure is that every vote is properly counted. Even a vote cast for somebody who loses by a large margin, the voter has the right to have their vote counted, and that's what we're doing.
Explain the process.
The process is the machines this morning began to be opened at 10 a.m. and basically there are dials similar to odometers on the machines, and what they do is they look at those and compare those readings to the readings that were manually recorded on a canvas sheet on election night. To the extent that they're verified, the same number will be re-entered on a re-canvas sheet, and if there's any discrepancies, those numbers will be changed on the re-canvas sheet to reflect accurately what the machine tally was.
So, Mike, we have about, I think, 78,000 paper ballots.
Yes.
Which is going to be a thing on Monday, not today.
Right.
So it's conceivable that's about 10% or so of the total number of ballots cast.
Yes.
Things could change.
Things could change, but as I have indicated over the last several days, I believe I indicated to you the other day, that we're not in the prognostication business, we're in the vote counting business. Our business is to make sure that the votes are counted accurately. As our count this morning was 78,491, we try to be very, very specific with that, and those envelopes will be opened commencing on Monday. They will consist of the emergency ballots that were cast on election night, on election day, the affidavit ballots that were also cast on election day at a polling place. The differentiation between those two is an emergency ballot is somebody that we have verified as being in the voter book. The affidavit ballot could be knocked out if the person was in fact not registered. And then we have the typical absentee ballots, military ballots, and special ballots, which consist of about 19,000 of the overall 78,000 number. But keep in mind that 78,000 number is a combined total of Democrat and Republican paper. We are not differentiating for the purposes of reporting out the difference between a Democratic piece of paper and a Republican piece of paper. So that 78,000 is the whole number, not a fraction. So exactly how that could possibly change is not our business to get into.
Okay, if we get to Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, and that 40.3% figure for Bill de Blasio, let's say it dips below and goes to 39.9, let's say.
Right.
What then?
What then is, there's a runoff. If that happens, Mr. de Blasio needs to maintain a 40% or higher number on the nose. If he dips below 40% on the nose, down to 39.9, there is a mayoral runoff. If he stays above it, there isn't.
But even if Thompson concedes on, let's say, Monday or Tuesday, for example, you just can't.
Correct. And essentially, it will be in what you call like a paper election. It's really not going to have any real effect at that point. However, keep in mind, we're still at the very early stages of the verification process. We don't know if we're there yet, and as I've said all the way along, the election night results are unofficial with a capital U. So when people start to wonder, how is this all happening? This is no mystery to us. This is what we do. And we're following strictly state law, which requires us to do this process sequentially to make sure that things are done in an organized fashion and that every vote is counted.
How long does the process take?
This process commenced at 10 o'clock this morning. For a borough small like Staten Island, it will probably be finished very quickly, likely today. But for the larger boroughs, we expect that process to run through sometime on Sunday. Could be early in the day, could be later in the day, but in any event, our target is to complete that process by Sunday so that on Monday morning, our workers can wake up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and start counting the paper ballots.
Some minor discrepancies here and there.
Explain how that happens. Why are there discrepancies?
What happens is, keep in mind, Election Day is a very long day for everybody. Poll workers come in at 5 o'clock in the morning. They're starting to do their tallies sometime after 9 o'clock, sometimes well after 9 o'clock if there's a long line, and by that I mean 9:20, 9:30. And it's a long day. People get tired. People make mistakes. It's a human process. So they're taking a reading from the machine and then writing it down on a piece of paper called a canvas sheet. There can often be transposition errors. For example, if the vote tally was 495 as written on the canvas sheet, but should have been 945, then that would be a flip of potentially 500 votes. We don't usually see discrepancies quite that large, but they could happen. In any event, we have to make sure that those discrepancies are cured in the recanvass process so that we can report to the public with confidence that we have an accurate vote tally.
It sounds like this is not going to affect the totals as much as what happens on Monday.
That is likely the case, absolutely. Again, keeping in mind that we have no idea what these envelopes contain. You know, ordinarily speaking, and not specifically to this race, our experience has been that the paper tracks the machines. If the paper is coming from a broad cross-section of the city, as the machines are coming from a broad cross-section of the city, likely the percentages that each candidate received on election night will remain fairly constant. But given how close the leader in this situation is to that magical 40%, that's where, you know, the margin of error starts to become, you know, more of an issue.
And 0.3% is roughly how many votes?
Well, I haven't. 0.3%, I would say, in an election this size, is probably closer to 4,000 votes.
So he's,
Right.
he's about 4,000 votes above 40%.
Correct. Roughly speaking. Again, you're putting me on the spot without my calculator in front of me to do the math, but you know, we've kind of crunched these numbers a little bit, but that's in the range. You know, 3,000 to 4,000 votes certainly.
So, but kind of to Dave's point, the total number, the vote total from the recanvassing is probably not going to change all that much, right? We're not talking about big changes here.
I hesitate to say that because every once in a while you find some large mistakes, but we're going through the process. We're comfortable right now with the numbers that we have already reported. Because of the anxiety and the stakes that seem to be riding on this for the candidates that are involved, I do not want to offer anything for public consumption that tends to, you know, sway the argument one way or the other. That's for the candidates to do. That's for their legal teams to decide. That's for their advisors to decide. We're just going to go about the business of counting the votes, and we're going to do that carefully.
But have you found anything that you're just like, oh, that's a really bad one?
No, I mean, we had 98 election districts, which may sound like a lot throughout the city, that had zeros entered, so that may be some fertile ground for somebody to pick up some votes. But those zero data entries are also expected. It's part of the process, because if, for example, somebody's handwriting on the canvas sheet was illegible, that would be entered as a zero. If a poll worker made a mistake and did not give the canvas sheet to the police officer on that night and packed it in with the materials and returned it with this machine, that would have to be entered as a zero. We discover that when we open the machines and say, oh my goodness, a poll worker in this election district stuck the canvas sheets, you know, in the machine. They shouldn't have. All right, let's get those vote tallies. That's the entire reason for the recanvassing process. If we could develop a system that we were 100% confident with all of the results on election night, we would not need a recanvassing process. But this system, these machines, are done by man. Man by nature is an imperfect being. Therefore, we have to do double and triple checks to make sure that every vote is counted. But I can assure you guys that our staff is working diligently and around the clock to make sure that this process is done as quickly as possible, but more importantly, as accurately as possible.